Are you struggling to come up with original content week in and week out? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients, let them talk about what they care about most, and never run out of content ideas again. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Roy Raanani. He is the CEO and co-founder at Chorus.ai. Roy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Logan. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Roy. I heard you recently chatting with Joe Vignolo over on the Sales Engagement podcast. I thought that was a phenomenal episode, and I'm really excited to have you share some things around what data is showing us reps and managers are doing well, as well as dig into some aspects of coaching today. But before we do that, Roy, I would love for you to share with listeners a little bit about your background and what you and the team at Chorus are up to these days.
Yeah, I'd love to. I grew up in Toronto, Canada, and moved to the Bay Area in 2008 for grad school. And over the years, I basically only had 3 jobs. One was working for a high growth enterprise software company in order to put myself through school. And I was doing technical pre-sales in addition to a whole bunch of other things. And then I spent a lot of years in consulting, working with high growth tech companies with management in order to improve the operational effectiveness of their organizations. And then lastly, I did early stage venture with Innovation Endeavors, which is Eric Schmidt's family office early stage venture fund, where I got a chance to work with incredible early stage companies. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I started thinking about what I wanted to dedicate the next decade of my life to. And I really care a lot about systems and processes and making things repeatable and better. And what I found amazing was that in every part of business, we measured and improved the most important activities. And when it comes to revenue, the most important thing that anybody can do is have a conversation with a prospect or with a customer. And that is the one part of a business and the one part of an organization that we have zero visibility into. And so if you have an organization with 50, 100, 200 sellers, there's no way to understand what it is that your top performers are doing so consistently differently from everybody else in order to move the needle. And we thought, wouldn't it be amazing if we could take these conversations, which are so important, we could record them, we could analyze them, and we could help teams understand what it is that their top performers are doing differently that's helping them create better buyer experiences, higher win rates, and closing more business. And so that was the idea behind Chorus.ai. And since then, we've raised over $50 million. We have the opportunity to work with some of the fastest growing, top performing sales organizations in the country, which include companies like Zoom, Outreach, Qualtrics, Adobe, and many more. And we've learned a lot from working with hundreds of teams and analyzing millions of conversations. So I'm excited to share some of the things that we've learned with your listeners today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is kind of the black box where a lot of things occur is conversations with prospects throughout the sales cycle. I've been in organizations where role playing, was used to varying degrees of effectiveness, but there is something to be said for analyzing what is actually happening in real time. How are prospective customers, future customers, as our buddy Sangram likes to say, how are they responding? What's working? What's not working? So I love the mission that you guys have over at Chorus. And as you mentioned, you guys have been analyzing a lot of data. So tell us a little bit about some of the learnings that you guys have been able to glean recently, Roy, on what the top performing reps can and should be doing differently.
Yeah, I get really excited to share this with folks because many of them are hearing insights like this about this data for the first time. So the first thing that I'll say is not everything is going to be groundbreaking. And for a lot of you out there, you're going to listen, especially if you're a manager, and you're going to say, I've been telling my team to do that for years, and it's nice to see the data back it up. So every point that I'm going to make or share today is going to be backed by data where it's going to make a meaningful difference on your win rate or your conversion rates. The first one, we actually just put out data a few weeks ago through our partnership with Zoom Video Communications. And one of the things that we found with Zoom is that the win rate on deals when all parties have their video turned on is over 9%, which is huge. So 9% on an absolute basis. And the way to tie this to things that most of us understand already is that a big part of sales is building credibility, rapport, and trust. And it looks as though having video turned on helps contribute to that trust building and credibility building. So it sounds small, but if you're in a Zoom with somebody, turn on that video, look professional, and engage them, and hopefully you'll see a change in your win rate.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We had Jonathan Bolton, who oversees customer success at BombBomb, another video or another company that focuses greatly on video like Zoom. And he was actually sharing that their customer success team, by using video and being able to connect their customer success team members with current customers, drove a huge increase in their first call resolution rate. So it doesn't surprise me at all that you're seeing that same sort of correlation in the sales process, Roy. What are some of the other things that you guys are seeing that would either validate some veterans or some managers that say, I've been seeing this all the time, or maybe surprise people? What are some of the other key data points that you found interesting lately?
Yeah, I'll mention two. One's going to be obvious and one might be a little bit less obvious.
Love it.
The next one is around your talk time. And I think that most of us know that we want to be active listeners during the early stages of a sales process. And what we found is that there is a high correlation between a talk time of between 45 and 55% for the sales reps. A talk time of 45 to 55% will lead to much higher conversion rates later in the sales cycle because reps are doing better discovery and more active listening. And so the question there is, what is it that top performers are doing to drive more engagement? And what we found was they ask anywhere from 3 to 5 engaging questions, which are questions that they'll repeat. So they've honed in on them. They use them repeatedly in those conversations, and it leads to a 30, 60, maybe even a 2-minute response from the prospect. So finding those questions that really get the prospect to open up. And second of all, when they're demoing, making sure that there is a high degree of engagement during the demo. So less successful sales reps will go on for maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes at a time during the demo with very little engagement from the process. And so I'd encourage your listeners to think about ways they can introduce questions into the demo to drive that engagement. So questions like, could you see how this would fit into your day-to-day workflow? Or what benefits would you see from a screen like this? Or what might you expect to see when your data is in this screen? Things like that keep people engaged.
Mm-hmm. I especially like that last one where you're connecting something specific from their world to the product and digging a little bit deeper into the future state that you're hoping for the future customer to be envisioning in that demo, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the third insight that I would share is around multi-threading. And what I mean by multi-threading is getting multiple buyers involved in the sales conversation early on. I'm sure that most of your listeners already know that in order to get a B2B deal done, there are more and more people involved in the process. Mm-hmm. And the traditional wisdom, conventional wisdom says, get more people involved. And the way that we do that is by one-off emails to different people in different roles and meetings with those different people. What our analysis showed is that the biggest impact happens when you have multiple buyers in the same meeting room together and you are engaging them all during that process. So put another way, if all you're doing is having meetings with one person at a time from the prospect, even if they're different people, even if they're senior people, that is the single best predictor that the deal will not close.
Wow.
So get people into the meeting room and then develop the skills to get them having a conversation with one another about what implementation would look like, about what the challenges would look like, about what their shared objectives are, and so on and so forth, and earn the right to be a part of that meeting.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. And I'm glad you followed it up there, Roy, because that's what I was going to ask is, what is likely the driver of that? Because that seems to make sense. And my thought was, well, you're getting them engaged in the process. You're getting kind of this cross-pollination of ideas and questions that wouldn't happen if you were having, those meetings individually with different stakeholders. It's more than just an addition problem, right? The exponential increase in the effect of having multiple decision makers happens when you get them all in the room or at least on the same video call. Hopefully it's video based on the last stat you were sharing at the same time. So that makes a ton of sense.
All right, today's growth story revolves around search engine marketing, and we'll be shining the spotlight on Aegis Software, a company that makes software for manufacturing operations. Aegis was one of the first companies in their space to invest in search marketing, but as competition grew, their performance plateaued. To counter this, they hired Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. With unparalleled experience in inbound lead gen for B2B companies, Directive was able to increase Aegis's monthly online leads by 457%, while at the same time lowering their cost per lead by 147%. Now I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
What are you guys seeing, Roy, around coaching? Because, as you mentioned, a lot of times it is tough to find these things out. What is working well? What are top performers doing well? And I imagine that top performers are getting more coaching. They're improving over time so that their skills aren't kind of plateauing. Am I right there? What can you tell us in some of the data and the things that you're seeing from the high growth, high performing sales teams that you guys are working with, Roy?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, I know so many people from sales, or so many people that go into sales and then see success in sales, have come from backgrounds where they had to build deep expertise, whether it's sports or music or things like that. And what's interesting is that in all of those other domains, the expectation is that you have a coach. The expectation is that you have a coach, and the expectation is that you're spending a meaningful part of your week before you quote unquote go on stage, right? Whether it's on stage or whether it's on the field, working on the holes in your game or the places where you're a bit weaker. And for some reason, when we enter into professional life, that disappears. And the expectation just becomes that we show up on the field for 5-6 hours a day, and we get very little coaching and professional development, and we're somehow expected to get better. And I think that what we're seeing is that the reason for it was that it was just so hard to get for a manager to get any visibility into what was happening on the front lines aside from joining a random call. And the thing that's changed is, number one, so many more sellers are now having inside sales meetings, meaning they're not just in the field showing up face to face, but they're doing Zooms, they're doing Uber conferences, etc., which makes it really easy to capture those meetings. And it means that a manager, if they're using a platform like Chorus.ai, can get full visibility into every deal, every meeting, every conversation, and has the opportunity to review the game film. And then similarly, sales reps can review the game film of what other top performers are doing to learn from that. And so what we found is a couple of things. One is the top performers end up being the ones that review the most game film. So that is a very strong correlation across all of our customers. The top performing reps end up reviewing their meetings the most. And so that's obviously a correlation. It's not causation, but what it tells you is they really want to understand everything that the prospect said in order to shape their follow-up and shape their preparation for subsequent calls and meetings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I love the sports analogy there. I mean, no team, just look at the NFL, and hopefully next year is a better year for us out in Denver, but that remains to be seen. But while we were lucky enough to have Peyton Manning as our quarterback for a bit with the Broncos, everyone always talked about his preparation, his time in the film room, and the way that he helped other team members do the same thing. And you're exactly right. Nowhere else in any other sort of performance endeavor, whether that's the arts or sports, do we expect not to review what happened. I mean, oftentimes in those instances, you're getting coaching live during the game, let alone in game film review. And in sales, oftentimes people are getting neither one and then wondering, why is it so hard to improve, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I were a sales rep, I would really think twice about joining any organization that isn't investing in my professional development. Because I think that the expectation when you take a job is that it's helping you prepare for the next stage in your career, whatever that might be. And for so many organizations, it's difficult to put those programs in place because managers simply don't have the time. And so we're seeing more and more organizations invest in the technology that makes it ROI positive for the amount of time that managers put into the program. And what's great about it is that we found that as you increase the amount of calls that you review over the course of the year, the win rates for a team go up by 30% over 12 months. Oh, wow. And what matters most about that is that it happens to the folks in the middle of the pack. So, your top performers obviously have something that's working very well for them. Mm-hmm. The challenge becomes, what about the middle 60%? The middle 60% typically can't have that much manager attention. Mm-hmm. And so they're looking for ways to learn from one another. And that's what this technology enables. So your win rates will go up if you invest the time to focus on those high impact moments in a conversation. And there doesn't necessarily need to be too many to start noticing a change. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that our analysis identified is that pricing conversations, there's very specific language around pricing conversations that lead to discounting. So let's assume that you're already going to win a deal because you've answered the question, why anything, why now, why Chorus? Mm-hmm. So you've already persuaded them to buy. At that point, there's a negotiation around price. What do you think is one of the biggest indicators of whether or not a discount will get introduced into the conversation?
I don't know if this is going to directly correlate to discount, but I know that oftentimes when there are more words spoken around pricing by the sales rep, to me, that indicates a lack of confidence. And so maybe that could prompt the prospect to push for more discounts. What does the data actually show? That's my first stab and one way that I think about the conversation around pricing.
Logan, you nailed it. So that's exactly it. It turns out that when you qualify pricing, the more you qualify pricing, the more likely the prospect is to dig into discounting. So examples are, if you were to say, well, the list price for our software is X $1,000. The fact that you've qualified the price by saying it's the list price or it's the standard price.
Yeah, sounds like right? Sticker price to me as I'm car shopping. I'm never paying sticker price.
Exactly. That's the first thing that goes into people's minds. Well, if this is the list price, nobody plays list. So what's my price? And so the very best reps practice and rehearse positioning that pricing, and they explain it in a very matter-of-fact way. And maybe they continue to explain what you get in terms of the other benefits, customer success, onboarding, training, and so on and so forth. But they're very matter-of-fact about the price and what it is.
Yeah.
And things like that, many folks don't even recognize until they review the film and say, oh my goodness, I can't believe that they asked me such a simple question. And I ended up rambling for 70 seconds with all of these caveats.
Exactly. So let's go back to the concept of coaching, reviewing the game film Roy, if there are individual contributors on sales teams, they are, as you said, looking to review their game film more often. And two, they're seeking out opportunities with organizations that are investing in their personal and professional development. I think those are two great places to start. What other actionable takeaways would you give to those sellers, Roy, as they look at owning their own personal and professional development? Because I completely agree with you there in looking for a company with that sort of culture. But I also agree with something, I've heard Scott Ingram and others echo a lot lately is that in sales, your investment in your own professional development, nowhere, you could argue that nowhere does it have as great an impact as quickly on your income as it does in sales. So with that in mind, and with the importance of not only reviewing game film, but coaching in the sales process, what are some things specifically around coaching that you would recommend individual sellers do?
Well, we were talking about this before we went live, but one of the things that's amazing about salespeople is how driven they are, and this idea of asking for forgiveness as opposed to asking for permission. And what I love to see in sales reps or any sales executive is taking a first step to change things. So you don't need your manager's buy-in to get a group of sellers together and say, hey, everybody, we're on the same team. Why don't we carve out an hour? It could be over drinks if that's part of your company culture on a Friday afternoon to talk about the deals that we're working and to talk about the things that are working well and to talk about the things that aren't working well. And if you do have the opportunity to record aspects of your calls and aspects of your deals, actually sharing that with your team and saying, hey, I ran into this really tricky situation. How do you approach it? And that culture is, I think, a culture of self-awareness and continuous improvement is one of the most powerful things that you can introduce into a sales team. And so start that conversation. You don't even need to involve the managers if they're not into it, and just get together with other sellers that you admire and you respect and start trading notes. Because at the end of the day, it's about winning and losing as a team, or as we like to say at Chorus, you either win or you learn. So how do you make sure that when you make mistakes, you make them once as a team, and not everybody on that team needs to learn that mistake the hard way?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're only relying on learning from your own mistakes, that means you have to make all of them. But if you're learning from your team's mistakes, you don't have to individually make all of those mistakes to learn from them, right?
Exactly right. And I think that, this is a place where top performers can really lead by example, because it takes a lot of self-confidence to open yourself up and say that you didn't do something well or that you could do something better. And I think it's so much easier for everybody when they see somebody who's done really well, who closed that biggest deal in the previous quarter, saying, you know what, I'm not perfect. There were a couple of things that I didn't handle right here. What can we learn from it? How do we get better? And so, that would be my advice. Be vulnerable, open yourself up. At the end of the day, what's beautiful about sales is that it doesn't matter how vulnerable you make yourself, the results are going to speak for themselves. And so if you're open to getting better and learning and improving, it's, if anything, it's going to improve your results, and then the results will speak for themselves. And that's a great way to change the culture for the better and hopefully help all of you crush your quotas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice to leave sellers with, Roy. It can be it can shake you up a little bit when you know that your conversations are being listened to, or you're sharing a misstep, or you're sharing certain things that typically you don't have to share with the rest of the team. But, to go back to the analogy of sports, everybody sees the scoreboard at the end of the day. So you might as well, open yourself up, because you are not only going to contribute to, like you said, a great culture within your sales org, but you're going to improve yourself in the process.
Couldn't agree more.
I love it. Well, obviously, we are very like-minded, Roy. I love what you're doing for just the profession of selling and what you guys do at Chorus. If anybody listening to this would like to follow up with you, stay connected with you, or learn more about what you and the team are up to at Chorus.ai, what is the best way for them to reach out or stay connected with you?
Yeah, so I'll have two asks. The first one is, if you got anything out of some of the data that I shared today, go ahead and go to our website at www.chorus.ai, click on our blog and sign up for updates. We publish very regularly, very data-driven, actionable insights that you can take into your next sales meeting. And so sign up there. And the other thing that you can do is you can follow us on LinkedIn. It's also Chorus.ai, and you'll see the research that we publish. And that's a great way to start getting to know one another. And hopefully we'll have a chance to work with each and every one of you at some point in the future.
I love it. Roy, this has been fantastic. Thank you for sharing data, for chatting sales. I always enjoy these sorts of conversations. So thank you for being on the show today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.